All she said was, "My mother had a ring just like yours." And that one sentence changed her entire life. They say you never really notice the small things until they hit you in a way you can't explain. For Janelle Brooks, that moment came on a Wednesday night at the Maplewood Country Club in Columbus, Ohio, right around closing time. The dinner rush had thinned out, and she was just about ready to clock out when her manager, Mr. Peterson, called from across the room. "Janelle, can you handle one more table before you go? VIP reservation. Came in last minute." She wanted to say no. Her feet were sore, her back ached, and her babysitter had already texted twice asking when she'd be home for her 6-year-old daughter, Naomi. But bills didn't wait, and Janelle couldn't afford to say no to extra tips. So she tied her apron back on, fixed her ponytail, and walked toward the private section near the back window. That's where she saw him. A man sitting alone at the corner table, staring out into the darkness of the golf course like he was searching for something that wasn't there. He was older, maybe in his late 50s. Sharp suit, silver watch, clean shoes. The kind of quiet confidence that money buys. But it wasn't his clothes that caught Janelle's attention. It was the ring, a thick gold band with a small emerald stone in the center. She stopped for half a second, blinking. She knew that design. Her mother, Angela Brooks, used to wear one exactly like it. Not similar, exactly like it. When Janelle was little, she'd sit on her mom's lap, tracing the shape of that ring with her finger. "Where'd you get it, Mama?" she'd once asked. Her mother smiled, that soft smile she always had when she didn't want to answer something directly. "It was a gift from someone who once meant everything to me. Angela had died 8 years ago. The ring disappeared long before that." Janelle pushed the thought aside and approached the table. "Good evening, sir. My name's Janelle. I'll be your server tonight." He didn't look up right away, just nodded faintly, still gazing out the window. When he finally did, his eyes were gray, calm, unreadable. "I'll just have black coffee," he said. His voice was deep, steady, the kind that could fill a boardroom. "Sure thing," Janelle replied, forcing a polite smile. She turned to leave, but something made her glance back. The way his hand rested on the table, the emerald flashing under the low lights. It was like that ring wanted her to notice it. She tried to ignore the pull of curiosity, but when she returned with his coffee, the words slipped out before she could stop them. "Excuse me, sir," she said softly, "but my mother had a ring just like yours." The man's hand froze on the coffee cup. His eyes shifted up to hers slowly, like he was measuring her every word. "What was your mother's name?" he asked quietly. "Angela Brooks," she answered, unsure why her heart was beating faster. For the first time, something flickered in his face. Not recognition exactly, but something close to it. He leaned back in his chair, his fingers still wrapped around the ring. "I see," he murmured, then turned his gaze back toward the window. He didn't say another word. Janelle stood there for a moment, confused. Had she said something wrong? The silence between them grew thick, uncomfortable. She eventually walked away, but her mind wouldn't let go of the questions spinning in her head. Why did he react like that? But later that night, when she found something strange written on the back of his signed receipt, Janelle realized this wasn't just a coincidence. It was the beginning of something much deeper. When Janelle got home that night, the apartment was dark, except for the soft glow of the kitchen nightlight. It was nearly 11:30 p.m., and she moved quietly so she wouldn't wake Naomi, her daughter. The little girl was curled up on the couch, her blanket halfway to the floor and the TV still playing softly. Janelle sighed, gently lifted her daughter, and carried her to bed. Naomi stirred for a second, mumbling, "Mommy, you smell like fries," before falling right back asleep. Janelle smiled faintly. "Yeah, baby. Mommy always smells like fries." She tucked Naomi in and went back to the kitchen, pulling off her shoes and rubbing her sore feet. The day's weight pressed down on her. The double shift, the demanding customers, the ache of working so hard just to keep things afloat. Bills were stacked near the microwave. The rent reminder was still in bold red ink. Her paycheck wouldn't cover everything this month, but she'd figure something out. She always did. Still, her mind kept wandering back to the man from earlier, Richard Langford, as his receipt had said. He'd left her a generous $200 tip, but that wasn't what bothered her. It was the message written in neat, deliberate handwriting across the bottom of the paper. "Tell me more about your mother." No phone number, no signature, just that one line. She'd stared at it for a long time before folding it into her pocket. Now, sitting at the small kitchen table, she unfolded it again, tracing the letters with her finger. What did he mean by that? Why would a billionaire care about her mother, a woman who'd worked at a diner her whole life? Janelle poured herself some orange juice and opened an old photo album from the cabinet, one of the few things she still had from her mom. The pictures were faded, but her mother's smile still shined through. Angela Brooks was beautiful, warm brown eyes, a calm face that could make you feel safe just by looking at her. There was one photo in particular Janelle hadn't noticed before. Her mom was standing in front of a building that looked like an office tower, wearing a cream-colored dress. And beside her, half out of frame, was a man in a dark suit. Only his arm was visible. And on his hand was that same gold ring. Janelle's heart skipped. She looked closer, squinting under the kitchen light. The sleeve of the man's jacket had an embroidered logo, Langford Holdings. Her stomach turned. She'd seen that name before, in the newspapers, on business networks. Langford Holdings was a massive real estate company that owned half of downtown Columbus. The man at the restaurant wasn't just a customer. He was that Langford. Was it possible her mom once knew him? The questions piled up, heavy and sharp. Janelle leaned back, closing the album. She didn't know what she expected to find, but now she couldn't ignore it. Something connected her family to that man, and he clearly knew more than he was letting on. She decided she'd go back the next day, maybe find out if he was still staying at the hotel next to the country club. Before heading to bed, she checked on Naomi again, brushing a curl from her daughter's forehead. "I'm gonna make things better for us," she whispered. "No more struggling. I promise." But as she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her mother's voice echoed in her memory, that calm, almost secretive tone she used when Janelle asked about the ring years ago. It was a gift from someone who once meant everything to me. What had her mother meant by everything? But Janelle didn't know yet that her search for answers would uncover truths that would shake everything she believed about her mother and herself. The next morning, Janelle woke up before sunrise. She hadn't slept much, tossing between confusion and curiosity. That note, "Tell me more about your mother," stayed at the front of her mind. She almost convinced herself to forget it, but something deep inside told her not to. Naomi was still asleep when Janelle got ready for work. She slipped on her black uniform shirt, tied her hair back, and left a note on the counter for her neighbor, Mrs. Ruiz, who watched Naomi while she worked weekends. By the time she reached Maplewood Country Club, the sun was climbing over the green hills. The morning air smelled of fresh-cut grass and coffee from the staff lounge. Mr. Peterson gave her a nod as she clocked in. "Morning, Janelle. You're early today." "Yeah," she said, adjusting her apron. "Just trying to get ahead of things." But that wasn't why she was early. She was hoping he would come back. By 11 a.m., the lunch crowd had started to build. Janelle balanced trays of iced tea and club sandwiches while her mind drifted. She checked the reservation list twice. Nothing under Langford. By 2 p.m., she began to think she'd imagined it all. Then she heard it. A voice at the host's stand, low and calm. "Table by the window, please." Janelle turned. Richard Langford stood there in another tailored suit, holding a newspaper under one arm. Their eyes met for half a second before he looked away. He didn't seem surprised to see her, almost as if he expected her to be there. When the host led him to his seat, Janelle felt her heart pounding. She grabbed her notepad, took a deep breath, and walked over. "Welcome back, sir," she said, trying to sound casual. He gave a faint smile. "Good to see you again, Miss Brooks." Hearing her last name from him sent a shiver down her spine. He remembered. "What can I get you today?" she asked. "Just coffee again. Black." As she poured it, she could feel his eyes studying her. After a moment, he spoke. "Did you think about what I asked last night?" Janelle hesitated. "I did. But I don't understand. Why would you want to know about my mom?" He set down the cup gently. "Because, Miss Brooks, your mother and I once knew each other." Janelle froze. The sounds of silverware clinking and muted conversations around them faded into the background. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I met Angela many years ago," he said. "She worked at a diner not far from where I used to live. I was going through a rough time back then. She was kind to me when I didn't deserve kindness." Janelle blinked, unsure what to say. "So, you gave her the ring?" He looked at his hand. Yes, I did. The admission hit her harder than she expected. That small, shiny object her mother wore so proudly. It wasn't just jewelry. It was a memory of a man sitting right in front of her. Why? She asked quietly. Richard sighed, his eyes drifting toward the window again. Because she reminded me of something I'd lost. My humanity, maybe. Your mother. She helped me see things differently. He paused, and for the first time, Janelle saw something fragile in his expression. Regret. But I didn't deserve her forgiveness, he continued. I left before I could explain anything, and when I tried to find her years later, she was gone. Janelle swallowed hard. She passed away 8 years ago. Richard nodded slowly, closing his eyes for a second. I'm sorry. She was a remarkable woman. The silence between them grew thick again, but this time it wasn't awkward. It was heavy with memories Janelle never knew existed. After a moment, she asked, So that's it? You just came here to tell me that? He looked at her directly. No, I came because there's something you need to see, something she wanted you to have. Janelle frowned. What do you mean? Richard reached into his jacket pocket and slid a small, aged envelope across the table. Your mother sent this to my company address 25 years ago. It was returned to me recently when one of my assistants was clearing old files. I opened it yesterday and I realized it was never meant for me. It was meant for you. Janelle stared at the envelope, her name written on it in her mother's handwriting. Her chest tightened. How could she? She must have written it before you were born, Richard said quietly. I didn't even know she had a daughter. Janelle sat down across from him, her legs trembling. She ran her fingers over the paper, the edges yellowed and soft. She wanted to open it right there, but part of her was scared of what it might say. Richard took a slow sip of his coffee. Read it when you're ready, he said, but be careful. The truth doesn't always bring peace. Janelle looked up at him, confused, but before she could speak, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, muttered something under his breath, and stood up. I have to go. You'll understand soon, Miss Brooks. And just like that, he was gone, leaving her with nothing but a letter that had waited 25 years to be opened. But what Janelle would read inside that envelope would shake her more than she ever imagined, because it didn't just talk about the past. It hinted at something still unfinished. Janelle sat in her car in the restaurant's parking lot for almost an hour, the envelope resting on her lap. Her hands kept brushing over it, but she couldn't bring herself to open it. Her mother's handwriting, looped and careful, felt like it was speaking from another lifetime. Finally, she tore it open. Inside was a folded letter written on thin cream paper. The ink had faded a little, but every word was clear. My sweet girl, if you ever find this, it means the truth has reached you in its own time. There are things about my past I never wanted to burden you with. I made mistakes, and I loved someone I wasn't supposed to love. His name was Richard. He wasn't the man people thought he was, and maybe I wasn't the woman I thought I was either. If you ever meet him, don't hate him. Just know that you are the best part of what came from that time. Love always, Mom. Janelle's eyes froze on that one line. You are the best part of what came from that time. Her breath caught. No, she had to be misunderstanding. Her mother couldn't have meant that. She read it again, slower. The words didn't change. Could Richard Langford be her father? Her heart raced so hard she had to grab the steering wheel just to steady herself. A part of her wanted to laugh. It sounded too wild to be real. But another part of her, deep down, already knew it was true. The ring, the reaction, the letter, it all fit too perfectly. She pulled out her phone and stared at the search bar for a long time before typing, Richard Langford Columbus biography. Articles filled the screen, pictures of him at charity galas, board meetings, and ribbon-cutting ceremonies. He looked the same as he had that night, composed, confident, untouchable. But one headline caught her attention. Billionaire Richard Langford donates to foster care initiative after admitting to personal loss. She clicked it. The article quoted him saying, "There are mistakes you can't undo, only acknowledge." That was it. The missing piece clicked into place. The man she served coffee to might have been her father all along. But she wasn't ready to believe it completely. Not yet. She needed proof. The next day, she called the country club's receptionist, pretending to confirm a catering order, just to ask if Mr. Langford was still in town. The woman told her he was staying at the Marriott on East Broad Street, likely until the end of the week. That was all Janelle needed to hear. After work, she drove straight there. Her nerves buzzed as she stood in the hotel lobby clutching the letter in her purse. She almost turned around twice. What was she even going to say? "Hi, I think you're my dad?" Before she could decide, the elevator doors opened, and there he was. Richard stepped out, phone to his ear, giving orders to someone on the other end. But when he saw her, he stopped mid-sentence. His expression softened, and he ended the call immediately. "Miss Brooks," he said, his voice low. "You read it, didn't you?" Janelle swallowed hard. "You knew, didn't you?" He looked away for a moment before answering. "I suspected. I didn't want to believe it until I saw you again." She took a step closer. "Why didn't you tell me yesterday?" "Because I wasn't sure how to," he said quietly. "Your mother and we had something real, but it was complicated. She left before I even knew she was pregnant. I spent years searching for her, and when I finally found where she'd lived, it was too late." Janelle's voice trembled. "So what am I supposed to do with that? Just accept it?" Richard looked at her for a long moment, his face tight with emotion. "You don't have to accept me. But you deserve to know where you come from." Tears filled her eyes before she could stop them. "You had everything," she said bitterly. "Money, power, comfort. Meanwhile, my mom worked 2 jobs just to feed me. You could have been there." His voice cracked. "If I'd known, I would have been." "You have every right to hate me, Janelle." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them felt heavy, too full of words neither knew how to say. But Janelle didn't realize that this confrontation was only the beginning, because what Richard was about to confess next would change the story of her mother's death forever. Janelle couldn't shake the weight of what she'd heard. She spent the next few days running on autopilot, working, picking up Naomi, cooking dinner, going through the motions. But her mind stayed stuck on that night in the hotel lobby. Her mother had loved this man. He'd been searching for her, and yet somehow the truth had been buried for decades. She needed more than words. She needed proof. That weekend, Janelle drove to her mother's old house on Fremont Avenue, the one she'd grown up in before it was sold after Angela's death. The place was boarded up now, weeds growing through the walkway. A "for sale" sign leaned against the porch. The front door creaked open easily. No one had lived there in years. Dust floated in the sunlight slanting through the broken blinds. Everything smelled faintly of old paper and wood polish. Janelle moved through the room slowly, running her fingers along the wall. Memories came flooding back. Her mom humming while cooking, laughter over breakfast, rainy days spent reading on the couch. In her old bedroom, she knelt by the closet where her mom used to keep a small metal lockbox. She remembered it because Angela never let her touch it. She found it behind a stack of boxes, rusted but still intact. It took her nearly half an hour to pry it open with a screwdriver she found in the garage. Inside were letters, yellowed with age, and a small black and white photo of her mother and Richard. Angela looked young, maybe 25. Richard was beside her, smiling. Really smiling, the way he hadn't at the restaurant. There was also a folded newspaper clipping. The headline read, "Local woman injured in office building accident. Investigation ongoing." The date was 28 years ago. The address listed was one of Langford Holdings' construction sites. As Janelle read the article, her stomach tightened. It said Angela Brooks, an administrative assistant, had been hospitalized after an equipment malfunction caused part of the ceiling to collapse. There were claims of negligence, but the company denied responsibility. That was the year before she was born. Her hands trembled as she turned the paper over. In her mother's handwriting were the words, "He said it wasn't his fault, but someone wanted to make sure I stayed quiet." Janelle sat back, stunned. Stayed quiet? About what? The next morning, she drove back to the Marriott, hoping to see Richard again. He wasn't there. The front desk clerk told her he'd checked out late last night. "Did he say where he was going?" Janelle asked. The woman shook her head. "No, but he left this envelope for you." Another envelope. Inside was a short letter and a small silver key. "Janelle, I know this is a lot to take in, but there's something you deserve to see, something your mother tried to protect you from. Go to my old office on West Main Street. The key will open a drawer in the left cabinet. Please be careful who you trust. R.L. double quote." Janelle folded the note, gripping the key tightly. Something about the warning made her uneasy. Be careful who you trust. Still, she had to go. That evening, she drove downtown. The Langford Holdings building was sleek and glassy, towering over the smaller offices around it. The lobby was mostly empty, and when she mentioned Richard's name to security, they waved her through like she'd been expected. Inside the office, the air was cold, still. The cabinets sat in the corner beside a large oak desk. Her hands shook as she inserted the key and turned it. The drawer opened with a soft click. Inside were a stack of legal documents, photographs, and one old cassette tape labeled Angela B. She found a small player on the shelf and pressed play. Her mother's voice filled the room, calm, trembling slightly. If anyone ever hears this, it means I couldn't keep quiet anymore. Richard, I loved you, but I couldn't protect you from the people inside your company. They made me sign papers to cover up what happened. I was never supposed to tell anyone. Janelle froze. Cover up? Protect him? The tape continued, the sound of her mother taking a shaky breath. If something happens to me, please, make sure our daughter knows who she is, and that none of this was her fault. Tears filled Janelle's eyes. She paused the tape, pressing her hand against her mouth. Her mother hadn't just been hurt. She'd been silenced. But what Janelle didn't know yet was that she wasn't the only one listening to that tape, and someone else would do anything to keep those secrets buried. Janelle sat in her car outside the Langford Holdings building, the cassette tape still playing in her head like an echo that refused to fade. Her hands were trembling, and not just from shock, from anger. Everything she thought she knew about her mother's life and death had just cracked open. Someone inside Richard's company had hurt her mother. Someone had made sure the truth never came out. And Richard? He'd built his empire on top of that silence. She didn't even notice how hard she was gripping the steering wheel until her knuckles turned white. By the time she reached the Langford estate, a massive property on the edge of Bexley, the sun was slipping low behind the trees. The iron gates were open, like someone had been expecting her. She drove up the long driveway, heart pounding. When she stepped out of her car, a man in a dark suit appeared at the door. Mr. Langford is in the study, Miss Brooks. He knew her name. The house was elegant but cold. Marble floors, quiet hallways, no sign of warmth anywhere. Janelle followed the sound of faint classical music until she reached a large room lined with bookshelves and old photographs. Richard was sitting behind a desk, a glass of whiskey untouched beside him. He looked up when she entered, his expression unreadable. I was wondering when you'd come, he said softly. Janelle didn't waste time. She pulled the cassette from her purse and slammed it on the desk. You want to tell me what this is? Richard stared at it, then at her. You found it. I listened to it, she said, her voice shaking. My mother was terrified, Richard. She said she had to sign papers to keep quiet. What did you people do to her? He rubbed a hand over his face, sighing heavily. It's not what you think. No? She snapped. Because it sounds like your company tried to cover up an accident, one that nearly killed her. Richard stood, his voice calm but firm. Janelle, listen to me. That accident wasn't supposed to happen. One of my partners at the time, a man named Victor Crane, ignored safety warnings to cut costs. When your mother threatened to go public, he panicked. He made her an offer, money in exchange for silence. I didn't find out until later. So you're saying you didn't know she was blackmailed? I didn't, he said. But when I did, I tried to fix it. She wouldn't take my help. She said she wanted to handle it her way. Then she disappeared, and I thought she'd moved on. Janelle's voice cracked. She didn't move on. She died still scared of your company. She died thinking someone might come after her again. Richard's shoulders slumped. And that's on me. I let her down. For the first time, he looked smaller. Not the billionaire who commanded boardrooms, but a man carrying a lifetime of regret. Janelle turned toward the door. You could have told me sooner. Instead, I had to dig through lies and secrets. Wait, Richard said, standing quickly. There's more you should know. She paused, but didn't turn back. Victor Crane is still alive, he said, and he knows that tape exists. That's why I told you to be careful who you trust. I think he's been watching you. Janelle froze. What are you talking about? Richard walked to his desk drawer and pulled out a small security photo. It showed a black SUV parked outside the country club 2 nights earlier, the night she first met him. My driver noticed it following me, he said. And this morning, it was parked near your apartment. Janelle's breath caught in her throat. You think he's trying to find the tape? I know he is, Richard said. And if he does, he'll destroy it. That recording is the only proof of what really happened. For a long moment, neither of them said anything. The truth, the danger, the years of buried guilt. It all hung in the air between them. Finally, Janelle stepped closer, her voice steady. Then we expose him. Together, Richard hesitated. You don't understand how powerful he is. I don't care, she said. You owe it to her. And I owe it to myself. Her words hit him hard. Slowly, he nodded. All right. Tomorrow morning, I'll make some calls. If we're going to do this, we do it right. As Janelle turned to leave, Richard's voice stopped her again. Janelle, whatever happens next, I want you to know I'm proud of you. She didn't answer. She just looked at him for a long moment. This man who might be her father, this stranger who carried pieces of her past. And then she walked out the door. But the next morning, before she could meet Richard again, something happened that would turn the entire story upside down. Janelle woke up to the sound of her phone ringing nonstop. The sky outside was gray, heavy with clouds. When she saw the caller ID, Bexley Police Department, her stomach dropped. Miss Brooks, the voice said when she answered, are you related to a Mr. Richard Langford? Her throat tightened. Yes, why? What happened? There was a pause. Then the officer's tone softened. I'm sorry to inform you, ma'am. Mr. Langford was found unresponsive in his home early this morning. It appears to have been a heart attack. For a few seconds, she couldn't speak. The phone slipped from her hand and hit the couch cushion. The words replayed in her head. Found unresponsive. Heart attack. Number. It couldn't be. She had just seen him last night. He had promised to call. They were supposed to meet this morning. She sat there, staring at the floor, the silence pressing down on her. But beneath the grief, something didn't sit right. It was too sudden, too neat. By noon, she was at his mansion again, standing behind the yellow police tape. Officers moved in and out of the house. A detective approached her, his notepad in hand. You must be Janelle Brooks, he said. Mr. Langford mentioned your name in some recent notes. She nodded faintly. They said it was a heart attack. That's the preliminary cause, the detective replied. But we're still looking into a few things. There were signs someone else might have been here before he collapsed. Janelle's pulse quickened. What kind of signs? He flipped through his notes. A broken glass on the floor, a chair knocked over, and the security footage for the last 12 hours is missing. Missing? She knew then. It wasn't just a heart attack. Someone had been there. That night, Janelle couldn't stay still. She kept playing her mother's cassette again and again, listening to her voice tremble through the tape. Every word felt like a clue. When the line came, they made me sign papers to keep quiet. She stopped it and rewound. This time she noticed something faint in the background. A man's voice, muffled but distinct, saying, "If you talk, you'll regret it." She'd never caught it before. Her chest tightened. That voice. She had heard it before, not in person, but on a recording Richard had played the night before while checking old company files. Victor Crane. The next morning, she drove straight to the Langford Holdings building again. Security tried to stop her, but she flashed the badge Richard had given her last night. Temporary access for internal matters. Victor Crane's office was on the 14th floor. The man himself looked older now, with gray hair and sharp eyes that didn't blink often. When she walked in, he smiled faintly. "You must be the waitress," he said. "Richard talked about you." Janelle stood her ground. "You were the one who made my mother sign those papers." He leaned back, unbothered. "That was a long time ago, Miss Brooks. I did what was necessary to protect the company." "You mean to protect yourself?" She shot back. "I heard your voice on the tape." His smile vanished. "You shouldn't have that tape." "I do," she said. "And the police will too." For a moment, his mask cracked. He stood abruptly, his voice low and sharp. "You don't understand the kind of trouble you're in." But Janelle didn't flinch. "You took my mother's peace. You took her voice. You're not taking mine." She turned and walked out before he could answer. Her hands were shaking, but she didn't stop until she was in her car. She called the detective she'd spoken to before. "I have something you need to hear," she said. and it'll tell you exactly what killed Richard Langford. But when the truth finally came out in the police report a week later, it wasn't just Victor who was exposed. It was an entire system of silence and power, and Janelle had cracked it wide open. The story made headlines across Ohio within days. Whistleblower's daughter exposes decades-old corporate scandal. Langford Holdings board member under investigation for cover-up. Reporters camped outside the office building, trying to catch a glimpse of Victor Crane as he was escorted out in handcuffs. The footage spread quickly. People who'd worked under him for years looked shocked. Some cried, some didn't. For Janelle, it didn't feel like victory, not at first. It felt heavy, like her mother's ghost had finally been heard, but at a cost she hadn't been ready to pay. Richard's funeral was small and private. A few family members, company executives, and Janelle stood quietly at the edge of the service. The autumn wind rustled through the trees, carrying the faint sound of the minister's voice. After the ceremony, an older woman approached her. "You're Janelle, aren't you?" she asked softly. "Richard talked about you in his last days. He said meeting you was the first time in years he'd felt forgiven." Janelle didn't know how to respond. She just nodded, tears pressing at her eyes. Later that evening, back at her apartment, she sat with Naomi on the couch. Her daughter rested her head against her shoulder. "Mommy, are you sad?" Naomi asked. Janelle smiled faintly. "A little, yeah, but also proud." Naomi looked up at her. "Because you told the truth?" "Yeah," Janelle whispered, "because we told the truth." For the first time in years, the apartment didn't feel so small. It felt like it had space for peace to settle in. The bills were still there, life would still be hard, but something deep inside her had shifted. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was healing. 2 weeks later, she received a letter from a law firm representing Richard's estate. It was short and simple. He'd left her part of his shares in the company, enough to secure Naomi's future. Janelle folded the letter, tears welling again. But this time, they weren't from pain. They were from gratitude. She stood by the window, looking out at the evening sky, holding her mother's photo in one hand and the ring in the other. "I did it, Mama," she whispered. "They finally heard you." Because sometimes, justice doesn't come with applause. It comes with truth and the courage to speak it, even when your voice shakes. So if you've ever felt silenced or overlooked, remember this. Your story matters, and it deserves to be heard. Don't stop speaking up. Someone out there needs your voice.